I spent 4 years climbing stairs on bad knees to pay off a dead man's debt, until my neighbor grabbed my arm one freezing morning and whispered, "Arthur, don't give her another cent. I saw a ghost man on the security feed last night. If you've ever had your trust broken, hit that subscribe button and let me know where in the world you're watching from, because this story is for you." That was the precise moment my mourning ended and my hunt for the truth began. The envelope in my jacket pocket felt heavier than it looked. $1,200 in mixed bills, held together by a rubber band. It was a dense, physical weight against my ribs, a monthly anchor that dragged me down. I stared up at the brick face of the apartment building on the north side. 4th floor, no elevator. My knees popped as I took the first step. It was a sharp, grinding sensation, the specific kind of damage you only get from 40 years of climbing ladders and crouching in crawl spaces. I was a master electrician, retired, but my body still carried the memory of every job. I knew about stress points and load-bearing structures. Right now, my legs were the structure, and the load was the $60,000 my son David had left behind. For Leo, I whispered, my breath plumed in the cold Chicago air. I did this for my grandson. If I didn't pay the private lenders, they promised to hurt the boy. That was the deal. I hit the second landing, gripping the banister. The wood was sticky. I paused, waiting for my heart rate to settle. A door cracked open a few inches. Mrs. Gable. She was a permanent fixture of the hallway, a lonely woman who treated her peephole like a television screen. "Arthur?" Her voice was a dry rasp. She held her cat, whiskers tight against her chest. "You're dragging your feet today." "Traffic was bad," I lied, not stopping. I didn't have the energy for small talk. "You look gray," she called after me, "like you've seen a ghost." I ignored her, but the words stuck to me like a burr. I climbed higher. By the time I reached 4B, sweat was cooling on my forehead. I checked my watch. 5 p.m. on the dot. Sarah, my daughter-in-law, was strict about the time. I didn't just knock. I rapped my knuckles on the wood in a specific rhythm. 3 sharp hits. Silence. I waited. I knew someone was inside. I could feel the vibration of movement through the floorboards. Another habit from the trade. You learn to feel a current before you touch the wire. "Sarah?" "It's Arthur." The deadbolt slid back with a heavy thunk. The door opened, but only as far as the security chain allowed. 2 inches of darkness. Then Sarah's face appeared in the slice of light. She looked wrecked. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a messy knot, and her eyes darted past me, scanning the empty hallway. She didn't look at me. She looked through me. "You're late," she whispered. "I'm here now." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the envelope. "It's all there." She didn't open the door to take it. She just shoved her hand through the gap. Her fingers were ice cold as they snatched the cash. There was no thank you. There never was. She tucked the money into her robe immediately, as if burning her skin. "I have to go." Arthur started to push the door shut. "Wait." I put my boot against the frame, gently but firmly blocking her. "Can I see Leo?" "Just for a minute." "He's sleeping." The lie came out too fast. "It's 5 in the afternoon, Sarah. He had a bad day, bullying at school. He needs rest." She pushed harder against the door, her knuckles turning white. "Please, Arthur. Not today." My heart sank. I just wanted to see that the boy was safe. I wanted to see the only piece of David I had left. David had been gone 4 years. An oil rig accident in Texas. No body, just a letter and a mountain of debt. "Fine," I said, stepping back. "Tell him Grandpa loves him." "I will." She was closing the door when it happened. Cough. The sound drifted out from the apartment. It wasn't a child's cough. It wasn't the soft, high-pitched wheeze of a sleeping boy. It was deep, rattling dry. I froze. My hand hovered in the air. The hallway seemed to drop away, leaving me standing on the edge of a memory. I knew that sound. I knew the specific timbre of it. After David came back from his first stint on the rigs, he had inhaled some chemical fumes. It damaged his lungs. For years he had a signature cough, a dry, hacking bark followed by a sharp intake of breath. "Oh, there it was again. Is someone in there?" My voice shook. Sarah's eyes went wide. For a second her mask slipped, and I saw pure terror. "It's just the TV," she stammered. "That wasn't a TV," I said, stepping closer. "That sounded like—" I couldn't finish the sentence. That sounded like David. It's a medical drama, Arthur. Go home. She slammed the door with a violence that shook the frame. The deadbolt snapped into place. Click. I stood alone in the dim hallway. The silence rushed back in, but it was different now. It was charged. My electrician's brain started working. I analyzed the input. The sound was organic. It had direction and depth. A speaker produces sound from a single point. A human chest resonates. That came from a chest. I stared at the wood grain of the door. Sarah swore she never dated. She said she was still grieving. She played the role of the weeping widow perfectly. So who was coughing in my dead son's apartment? I walked home, in a fugue state. The Chicago wind had teeth that night, cutting through my canvas jacket. But I didn't feel the cold. I only felt the echo of that cough. It was a loop in my head, a corrupted audio file playing over and over. Her puck. My boots crunched on the salt-stained pavement. I knew sound. I knew vibration. I spent 40 years listening to the hum of transformers and the buzz of faulty wiring. A man's cough is a fingerprint. It has a specific resonant frequency based on the size of the chest, the damage to the tissue, the shape of the throat. That was David's frequency. I unlocked the front door of my bungalow. The silence inside usually hit me like a physical blow, the vacuum left by Eleanor's death 3 years ago. But tonight, the silence was screaming. I didn't turn on the light. I navigated by the street lamps filtering through the blinds, moving to the kitchen. I poured a glass of water, my hand trembling just enough to spill a few drops on the linoleum. "Get a grip, Artie," I whispered. I sat in my recliner in the living room, the leather creaking under my weight. The house settled around me, the furnace kicking on with a metallic groan, the refrigerator cycling. Normal sounds. My eyes drifted to the mantel. The photo, Eleanor and David smiling on a pier in frantic sun-bleached color. I made the payment. LL, I told the dark room. 1,200, 1 year left on the debt. She didn't answer. She had died of a broken heart 6 months after we got the news about the oil rig. She simply powered down, like a machine with a blown fuse. I closed my eyes, but sleep was a joke. Every time I drifted off, the cough jerked me awake. Was I losing it? Grief is a kind of madness. It rewires the brain, makes you see faces in crowds and hear voices in the static. Maybe I was just an old man desperate for a ghost. Morning arrived, gray and heavy. I went out to get the paper, moving stiffly. The cold had settled into my joints overnight. Arthur. I froze, halfway down the walk. Mrs. Gable was on her porch again, wrapped in a thick wool cardigan, holding a mug of tea with both hands. She wasn't looking at her plants today. She was looking at me, her eyes dark and serious. She beckoned with a crooked finger. "Come here." I didn't want to talk. I wanted to go inside and stare at the wall, but there was an urgency in her posture that pulled me in. I walked over to the edge of her railing. "What is it, Mrs. Gable?" She glanced left and right, scanning the street. "I didn't want to say anything yesterday. You look dry and fragile." "I'm fine," I said, my voice harder than I intended. "Just tired. I saw something, Arthur. Last night, or rather, early this morning." She lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Around 2. Saw what?" "At Sarah's building. I was up with Whiskers. He has the arthritis. Poor thing, and I was looking out the window." She gripped her mug tighter. "A man," he went into the building. My stomach turned over. "A boyfriend?" "Sarah said she doesn't date." "That's what I thought at first. But he had a key, Arthur. He didn't buzz. He just walked in. So? Maybe she gave him a key." I felt a flare of irrational anger. I was paying off her dead husband's debts, keeping the sharks away from her son, and she was sneaking men in at 2 a.m. "No, Arthur, you're not listening." Mrs. Gable leaned over the rail. It was the way he walked. The wind picked up, rattling the dead leaves in the gutter. "What do you mean?" I asked. He had a limp, a bad one. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. My breath caught in my throat. "Describe it," I said. My voice sounded hollow, like it was coming from someone else. "Left leg," she whispered. "He would step with the right, then drag the left. A sort of Swinging motion. Step, drag, step, drag. I stopped breathing 10 years ago. A car crash on I-90. David had shattered his femur. Even after the surgeries, the leg never set quite right. He had a unique gait, a rhythmic, painful hitch that he couldn't hide. Step, drag. It looked like him, Arthur, Mrs. Gable said, her voice trembling now. Under the hood of his jacket, the jawline, the walk. It looked like your son. That's impossible, I choked out. David is dead. We have his ashes on the mantel. Mrs. Gable looked at me with a pity that burned. Do you? Wait, what? Did you ever open the urn, Arthur? The question hung in the cold air between us. No, I said. It was sealed by the crematorium in Texas. Texas, she repeated. A long way away. I backed away from her porch. I felt sick, a sour taste rising in my throat. Logic was fighting a war with hope. He's dead, I said again, but it sounded like a question. Go home, Arthur, she said softly. Check the urn. I turned and walked back to my house. I didn't feel the pavement under my feet. My mind was racing, connecting circuits that shouldn't exist. The cough, the limp, the closed casket, the sealed urn. I entered my living room and stared at the brass vessel on the mantel. It sat there, heavy and solemn, reflecting the gray morning light. David Miller, beloved son and father. I reached out. The metal was cold. I stepped back from the mantel. My hands were shaking, hovering inches from the brass lid of the urn. I couldn't do it. Not yet. Opening that urn was a line I couldn't cross. If I was wrong, if this was just grief poisoning my mind, I would be desecrating the only thing I had left of my son. I would be the crazy old man Mrs. Gable thought I was. I needed data. I needed hard evidence. In my line of work, you don't guess where the fault lies. You test the line. You isolate the variable. I went to the kitchen and dialed Frank. Frank was retired NYPD, a transplant to Chicago who spent his pension on high-end electronics and cheap cigars. We played poker on Sundays. He was the only man I knew who listened more than he talked. Frank, I said, I need a favor. It's Tuesday, Artie. Poker's Sunday. His voice was gravel, roughened by smoke. It's not about poker. It's about Sarah's building. I need to see the security feed. There was a long pause on the other end. You sound rattled. What's wrong? I hesitated. I think I saw a ghost. Frank didn't laugh. He didn't ask if I'd been drinking. He just grunted. Come over. Bring the address. I'll warm up the system. Frank's basement was his command center. It smelled of ozone and dust. Banks of monitors lined the far wall, glowing with blue light. Frank had a buddy in private security who gave him backdoor access to half the rental properties on the north side. It wasn't exactly legal, but Frank didn't care about legal anymore. He cared about knowing. I sat on a metal stool, my knees aching. Okay, Artie, Frank said, his fingers flying over a backlit keyboard. You said last night? 2:00 a.m. The stairwell. Pulling it up. The screen flickered. Static washed over the image, then resolved into a grainy black and white view of the apartment lobby. It was empty. A piece of trash blew across the floor. Fast forwarding, Frank muttered. The timestamp in the corner scrolled rapidly. 1:00 a.m. 1:30 a.m. 1:30 a.m. 1:55 a.m. Stop, I said. 2:03 a.m. The screen froze. A figure had entered the frame. He was wearing a heavy hoodie. The hood pulled low, and a medical mask covering the lower half of his face. He looked like a shadow detached from the wall. Okay, Frank said, leaning in. Watch the movement. He hit play. The figure moved toward the stairs. My breath caught in my throat. Step, drag. The left shoulder dipped. The left leg swung out in a wide, painful arc before planting. Step, drag. I felt the blood drain from my face. It wasn't just a limp. It is a mechanical failure in the human body I had watched for 10 years. It was the specific way David compensated for the titanium rod in his femur. That's him, I whispered. That's David. Hold on, Frank said. Let's see where he goes. He switched camera views. Fourth floor landing. The figure appeared at the top of the stairs. He didn't look around. He didn't hesitate. He walked straight to door 4B, Sarah's apartment. I watched, waiting for him to knock. Waiting for him to break in. Instead, the figure reached into his pocket. He pulled out a key. My heart hammered against my ribs, like a trapped bird. He slid the key into the lock. He turned it, the handle depressed. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. The screen went static for a second, then settled back to the empty hallway. Frank paused the video. He turned his swivel chair to face me. His face was grim, lit by the harsh blue light of the monitors. "He has a key, Arthur," Frank said softly. "You don't knock on your own front door." "He's alive," I said. The words tasted like ash. "He's been alive this whole time." "Let's check the history," Frank said, turning back to the keyboard. "Let's see how long this has been going on." He brought up the previous month. The night after I dropped off the money, there he was again. 2:15 a.m., step drag key in the lock. Frank checked 6 months back. Same pattern, always the night after payment day. Always late, always with a key. "He collects the cash," Frank said, his voice flat. "He waits for you to leave the envelope, waits for the coast to clear, and then he comes home." I stared at the frozen image of the man who was supposed to be my son. The man whose funeral I had paid for, the man whose widow I was supporting with my pension. "He's stealing from me," I said. The shock was fading, replaced by a cold, hard current of rage. $60,000 in debt, loan sharks. It was all a lie. "We need to know why," Frank said. "If he's alive, how did he fake the death certificate? Who signed off on the body?" "I don't care about the how," I said, standing up. My knees didn't hurt anymore. The adrenaline had taken over. "I care about the betrayal." "Sit down, Arthur," Frank commanded. "You go over there half-cocked. They'll bolt. If they faked a death, they're pros. We need to be smarter." "Smarter?" I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "I've been the stupidest man in Chicago for 4 years. "No," Frank said. "You've been a father. Now you need to be an investigator." He pulled up a new window on the screen. "I'm going to find out who signed that death certificate," Frank said. "And you're going to find out where the money is really going." Frank's sedan smelled of old leather and stale coffee. We were parked in an alley behind a row of dilapidated storefronts on the south side. Rain had started to fall, drumming a nervous rhythm on the roof. "You sure about this guy?" I asked, watching the wiper blades smear the streetlights across the glass. "Eli Vance knows every bookie, shark, and fence in Chicago," Frank said, killing the engine. "If your son owed 60 grand to dangerous people, Eli knows who holds the paper." We stepped out into the drizzle. The neon sign above the door buzzed like an angry hornet. Vance Pawn and Loan. The windows were barred with heavy iron grates. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of dust and desperation. Guitars hung from the ceiling like hanged men. Glass cases were filled with wedding rings and watches. Entire lives pawned for quick cash. Eli Vance sat behind a wall of bulletproof glass. He was a small man with eyes that moved too fast, like a rodent scanning for predators. "Frankie," Eli said, his voice scratching through the speaker. "Long time. You looking to pawn that badge finally?" "I kept the badge, Eli. Just lost the patience." Frank slapped a photo against the glass. It was David's mugshot from a DUI 10 years ago. "I need to know who owns this guy's debt." Eli squinted at the photo. He didn't blink. "Miller, the oil rig kid. You know him?" I stepped forward, my hands gripping the counter. "Everybody knew him," Eli said, typing on a greasy keyboard. "He played the ponies, badly. Owed the Greeks. Owed the Russians. Kid had a hole in his pocket. He owed 60,000 when he died." I said, "I've been paying it off." Eli stopped typing. He looked up, and for the first time, his expression shifted from boredom to something like amusement. He let out a dry, hacking laugh. 60 large? To who?" "Private lenders," I said. "They threatened his son." Eli laughed harder. It was an ugly sound. "Old man, you're getting played?" My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "David Miller cleared his books 5 years ago," Eli said, tapping the screen. Right before he went to Texas, cashed out a 401k, sold his truck. He paid every cent. The Greeks, the Russians. He was clean. Clean, I whispered. Spotless, Eli confirmed. There are no sharks coming for his kid. There never were. The room seemed to spin. I grabbed the edge of the counter to steady myself. So the money, I stammered. The money you've been paying? Eli smirked. That's just a donation, Pop. Someone's retirement fund. I felt sick, physically sick. For 4 years I had been handing over my pension, climbing stairs with bad knees, eating canned soup to save money, all to protect Leo from a threat that didn't exist. He's stealing from me, I said, my voice barely audible. My own son. And the wife, Frank added grimly. She collects it. I turned away from the glass. The rows of pawned engagement rings suddenly looked different. They weren't just objects. They were betrayals, just like my life. We're done here, Frank said, grabbing my arm. We walked out into the rain. The cold water felt good on my face. It washed away the shock and left only the clarity of the truth. There are no sharks, I said to the wet pavement. It was a lie. All of it. We know the what, Frank said, opening the car door. Now we need the how. If he's alive, there's a death certificate, a legal document. Someone signed it. Who? A doctor, Frank said, starting the engine. And if he signed a fake death certificate, he's dirty, and dirty men talk when you squeeze them. I got into the car. I didn't look back at the pawn shop. I looked at my hands. They were electrician's hands. Scarred, calloused, strong. Hands that fix things. Find the doctor, Frank, I said. I want to see the man who killed my son, on paper. Frank made the call from the car. He still had contacts in the coroner's office. People who owed him favors from the old days. It took 10 minutes to get a name. Dr. Iris Thorne, Frank said, hanging up his cell. General practitioner, operates out of a strip mall in Cicero. Cicero, I muttered. Fitting. We drove in silence. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and black, reflecting the neon signs of payday loan joints and liquor stores. I watched the city blur past, my mind dismantling the last 4 years of my life. I was looking for the splice, the exact moment where the connection had been cut and rewired. Dr. Thorne's clinic was wedged between a nail salon and a vacant storefront. The blinds were drawn. A hand-painted sign on the glass read, Walk-ins welcome. Let me do the talking, Frank said as he killed the engine. You just look like a grieving father who might snap. That won't be hard, I said. We pushed through the door. A bell chimed, a cheerful tinny sound that clashed with the room. The waiting area was empty, smelling of rubbing alcohol and old magazines. The receptionist's desk was vacant. A man in a white coat emerged from the back hallway. He was balding with a nervous tic in his left eye and sweat stains under his arms. He froze when he saw Frank. We're closed, Thorne said, his voice jumping an octave. Frank didn't say a word. He just walked up to the counter and placed his heavy hand on the linoleum. He didn't pull a badge. He didn't have one anymore, but he projected the authority of 30 years on the force. David Miller, Frank said. Thorne flinched. The name hit him like a physical blow. He tried to compose himself, adjusting his glasses with trembling fingers. I don't know that name. Patient files are confidential. He wasn't a patient, I said, stepping up beside Frank. He was a corpse. Or so you said. Thorne looked at me, then back at Frank. He saw the trap closing. Gentlemen, if you don't leave, I'll call the police. Frank laughed. It was a low, dangerous rumble. Call them. I'd love for them to see your files. I'd love for them to audit your prescriptions. Thorne's face went pale. He licked his lips. What do you want? The death certificate, Frank said. Oil rig accident. Texas. But you signed it here. Why? It was a transfer, Thorne stammered. Paperwork came from the company. I just certified the local records. Did you see the body? I asked. My voice was quiet, but it filled the small room. Thorne looked at the floor. The casket was sealed. Contamination protocols. It's standard. Layer, I snapped. I slammed my hand on the counter, making a cup of pens jump. There was no body. There was no accident. You signed a piece of paper for a ghost. Thorne backed away, hitting the wall. I didn't know. I swear. How much? Frank asked. What's the price of a man's life these days? Thorne was shaking now. The fight had left him. He was just a small, greedy man caught in a lie too big for him. 5,000, he whispered. Who paid you? I demanded. The wife, Thorne said. Sarah. The name hung in the air, heavy and toxic. She came to me crying, Thorne continued, the words spilling out in a rush. She said her husband was in trouble with bad people. Cartels, gangs. I don't know. She said if he didn't disappear, they were going to kill him. She said she was saving his life. Saving his life, I repeated, feeling a bitter laugh rising in my chest. I thought I was helping, Thorne cried. She said it was the only way to protect their son. She protected her bank account, Frank said, leaning over the counter. And you helped them rob this man blind. We left Thorne shaking in his waiting room. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I had the answer. It wasn't just David. It was Sarah. She wasn't a victim. She was the architect. She had played the grieving widow, the terrified mother, the struggling single parent. She had looked me in the eye every month for 4 years, taken my money and tucked it into her robe while my son hid in the back room. I walked to the car, my boots heavy on the wet asphalt. She played me, Frank, I said. She played us all. So what's the move? Frank asked, unlocking the doors. I looked at the clinic, then at the gray sky. My sadness was gone. It had burned away, leaving something cold and hard in its place. Steal. We follow the money, I said. If she's not paying loan sharks, she's putting it somewhere, and we're going to find out where. We follow the pattern, Frank said, tapping the steering wheel. She dumps the kid on Tuesdays. Says it's for therapy. Let's see what kind of therapy she's getting. Tuesday afternoon, the sky was a bruised purple, threatening snow. I pulled my truck up to the curb outside the school, watching the chaotic flood of children in bright coats spill onto the sidewalk. I spotted Leo immediately. He looked small, his backpack dragging him down, standing apart from the other kids. My chest tightened. He was the innocent variable in an equation of lies. Sarah was already there, but she wasn't looking at him. She was checking her reflection in the side mirror of her sedan. She wasn't wearing her usual drab, grieving mother sweats. She wore a fitted trench coat and boots with a heel. Her hair was blown out, shiny and loose. I walked up just as she spotted me. Arthur, she said, startled. A flush rose in her cheeks, but she smoothed it over with a practiced smile. I didn't know you were coming. I thought I'd take him for burgers, I said, keeping my voice level. Give you time for your errands. Relief washed over her face so plainly it hurt to watch. She didn't want her son. She wanted him gone. That would be wonderful, she said, already unlocking her car. Drop him off by 7. I have a late session. 7, I agreed. She didn't kiss Leo goodbye. She just waved and slid into the driver's seat. As she pulled away, I caught the scent of her perfume in the cold air. It was heavy, floral, inexpensive. Not the scent of a woman scraping by on charity. We went to a diner on 4th Street, a place with vinyl booths that smelled of grease and lemon polish. Leo was quiet, dipping a French fry into a pool of ketchup with mechanical precision. You okay, Scout? I asked. He shrugged, not looking up. Mom's always on the phone. I froze, my burger halfway to my mouth. Who is she talking to? She whispers, Leo said. She goes in the bathroom. Does she say a name? Leo thought for a moment, chewing slowly. Uncle Brian. She talks to Uncle Brian a lot. The name hit me like a shovel to the gut. Brian Cole, David's best friend since Little League. The man who had stood beside me at the memorial service, his face wet with tears. The man who had carried the weight of the empty casket on his shoulder. Brian, I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady. Does he come over? Sometimes, Leo said. When you're not there. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A single vibration. I pulled it out under the table. A text from Frank, an image attached. Subject in view. Downtown. Coffee shop on State. I tapped the image to expand it. The photo was taken through a window, grainy, but unmistakable. Sarah was sitting at a small round table. Her coat was unbuttoned. Her hand was resting on the table, fingers interlaced with the man sitting across from her. It wasn't David. It is Brian. I zoomed in. They weren't just holding hands. Brian was leaning across the table, whispering something that made Sarah throw her head back in laughter. It was a laugh I hadn't seen in 4 years. It was the laugh of a woman in love. A woman without a care in the world. I stared at the screen until the backlight timed out and the image went black. The betrayal had layers, strata of sediment hardening into stone. David was alive, hiding in the shadows, presumably to escape a debt that didn't exist. Sarah was protecting him, collecting my money to keep the secret. But here she was, in broad daylight, playing house with David's best friend. Was David in on this part, or was he the biggest fool of us all? "Grandpa?" Leo asked. "Are you mad?" I looked up at his worried face. I forced a smile that felt like cracking plaster. "No, Leo, I'm not mad at you." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Eat your fries." I dropped him off at 7 p.m. sharp. Sarah met us at the door. She had changed back into sweatpants, scrubbed her face clean of makeup. The perfume was gone, replaced by the smell of laundry detergent. The transformation was terrifyingly efficient. "Did he behave?" she asked, pulling Leo inside. "He's a good boy, Sarah. Better than we deserve." She paused, sensing the edge in my voice. "Is everything okay, Arthur?" I looked her dead in the eye. I channeled 40 years of reading blueprints, of finding the structural flaw before the building collapsed. "You look nice today," I said. "Did you see anyone?" "Just the therapist," she lied without blinking. "And a friend." "Oh? Anyone I know?" "Just a friend from the support group." "That's nice," I said. Leo mentioned Brian comes around. The air left the hallway. Her pupil dilated, a microscopic twitch at the corner of her mouth. "Brian," she laughed, but it was brittle. He helps with the sink sometimes. He's a good friend to David's memory." "He was a pallbearer," I said softly. "He carried the weight." "Yes," she whispered, her eyes darting away. "He's very loyal. Loyalty is rare," I said. "Tell Leo I love him." I turned and walked away before I did something that would send me to jail. I heard the deadbolt slide home behind me. I got into my truck where Frank was waiting on speakerphone. "You see the picture?" Frank asked. "I saw it. It's Brian." "There's more," Frank said. His voice was tight. "I ran the plates on Brian's car. I tracked his GPS history for the last month. And he goes to Gary, Indiana, every Tuesday night, right after he leaves Sarah. Gary, an industrial park, abandoned warehouses. He stays for an hour, then drives home. That's where he is," I said. The realization clicked into place like a breaker switch. "That's where they're keeping David. We need to go there, Arthur," Frank said. "Tonight?" "No," I said, gripping the steering wheel. "Not yet. I need to know where the money is going first. If Brian and Sarah are together, and David is in a warehouse, who is getting the cash?" "We need a forensic accountant," Frank said. "I know a guy, Marcus Reed. Expensive, but he can find a dime in a haystack." "Call him," I said. "I'm done guessing." Marcus Reed didn't look like a man who hunted money. He looked like a man who spent it. We met him at a dimly lit jazz bar in the Loop, a place with leather booths that swallowed you whole and cocktails that cost more than my weekly grocery bill. Frank slid into the booth opposite him. I squeezed in next to Frank, feeling the grease of the day on my hands. Marcus was wearing a suit that shimmered under the low lights, his cufflinks catching the glint of his whiskey glass. "Frankie," Marcus nodded, sliding a slim tablet across the mahogany table. "You bring me the most interesting puzzles." "Cut the charm, Marcus," Frank grunted. "What did you find?" Marcus tapped the screen. Spreadsheet bloomed into existence, rows of data highlighting in red. "You were right about the wife," Marcus said, his voice smooth. "Professional. She's not destitute. She's structured." "Explain," I said, leaning forward. "Sarah Miller receives a monthly deposit of $1,200. Cash." "I assume that's you, Arthur." "That's me. That goes into a checking account at Chase," Marcus continued. "Standard. pays the rent, buys groceries. But here's where it gets interesting. He swiped left. She has a second account. Digital only. Opened 18 months ago under a shell corporation. Phoenix Consulting. Phoenix, I muttered, rising from the ashes. Exactly. Into this account, there are bi-weekly deposits. Variable amounts. 500 here, 800 there, sometimes 1,000. Where is it coming from? Frank asked. Freelance coding, Marcus said. It's routed through a dozen payment processors. But I traced the IP. It originates from a static address in Gary, Indiana. My stomach tightened. David, your son was a coder before the rigs, right? Marcus looked at me. He's working. Remote jobs. Under the table. And every cent he earns goes into this account. So he's paying her too, I realized. He thinks he's paying off the debt. He's pouring water into a bucket with no bottom. Marcus corrected. Because look at the withdrawals. He tapped a final graph. Every month the balance of Phoenix Consulting is swept clean. Transferred to an offshore entity in the Cayman Islands. Whose name is on the offshore account? Frank asked, though I think we both already knew. Marcus expanded the file. The names glowed in high-definition misery. Joint holders, Sarah Miller and Brian Cole. The air in the bar felt suddenly thin. The clinking of glasses and the soft hum of the saxophone faded into background noise. They're bleeding him dry, I whispered. My hands clenched into fists on the table. They have David working like a dog in some warehouse, thinking he's saving his family from killers. And they're taking it all. My pension. His earnings. Everything. It gets worse, Marcus said gently. I pulled the travel records for the offshore account holders. Flight bookings. He turned the tablet so I could read the itinerary. O'Hare to Nassau. One way. First class. Departing next Monday. They're running, Frank said. They're cashing out. 2 tickets, I noted, reading the names. Sarah Miller. Brian Cole. No David, Marcus said. And no Leo, I added, my voice cracking. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. It was a demolition job. They weren't just stealing money. They were stealing lives. They were going to leave David rotting in a warehouse in Indiana, waiting for a clearance signal that would never come. And they were going to leave Leo. Where? With me? Or just abandon him to the system? They treat people like disposable components, I said, standing up. Burned out fuses. Toss him in the trash. Sit down, Arthur, Frank warned. We have the paper trail. Now we need the physical proof. I know where the physical proof is, I said. He's in Gary. We go tonight, Frank said, looking at Marcus. Send me the files. Everything. Already in your inbox, Marcus said, taking a sip of his drink. Pro bono, Frank, for old time's sake. And because I hate greedy amateurs, we walked out of the bar into the biting wind. The city looked different now. It wasn't just a place I lived. It was a machine, grinding people down. But I knew machines. I knew how to break them. Gary is an hour away, Frank said, checking his watch. You ready for this? I need to do one thing first, I said. What? I need to check the urn, I said. I need to look the lie in the face before I tear it down. I walked into my house and the silence was different now. It wasn't empty. It was waiting. I went straight to the living room. The brass urn sat on the mantel, flanked by 2 candlesticks Eleanor had bought at a flea market in '98. The urn was heavy, dignified, with a matte finish that absorbed the light. David Miller, beloved son and father. I picked it up. It felt dense, a solid weight that had anchored this room for 4 years. Eleanor used to hold this thing, late at night, when she thought I was asleep. I'd find her in the rocking chair, clutching the cold metal against her chest, rocking back and forth. She'd whisper to it. She'd kiss the lid. She died holding on to this lie. I carried it to the garage. The air in there was freezing, smelling of gasoline and sawdust. My domain. I set the urn on my workbench, clearing away a scattering of washers and fuses. Under the harsh fluorescent strip light, the brass looked cheap. I didn't want to damage it. Some part of me still revered the symbol, even if the reality was rot. But the seal was thick, heavy industrial wax and a pressure-fit lid. I opened my toolbox. I selected a flathead screwdriver, a thick one with a yellow handle and a rubber mallet. "Forgive me, El," I whispered, my breath fogged in the cold air. I wedged the tip of the screwdriver under the rim of the lid. I tapped the handle with the mallet. Tink, tink. The wax cracked. A hairline fracture appeared in the seal. I pushed down on the handle, using it as a lever. My shoulder ached, the old injury flaring up, but I leaned my weight into it. The metal groaned. It was a high-pitched screech, like a nail on a chalkboard. Pop. The lid came loose. It rattled against the workbench. I stood there for a moment, staring at the open mouth of the urn. It was dark inside. I reached in. My hand brushed against a thick, heavy plastic bag tied with a twist tie. I pulled it out. It was heavy, too heavy for ash. Ash is light, fluffy, like gray flour. This had mass. It shifted and clicked. I untied the knot. My fingers were stiff with cold and dread. I poured a handful of the contents onto the workbench. It wasn't ash. It was gray, granular pellets. Dust rose up, choking and dry. I sifted through it with a trembling finger. I found a small, jagged piece of stone, a pebble, and then a flash of blue, a piece of aquarium gravel. Cheap, clay-based kitty litter mixed with driveway gravel. They had filled a brass jar with rocks from a parking lot and handed it to a grieving mother. My legs gave out. I didn't fall. I just sank, catching myself on the edge of the bench. I stared at the pile of litter. The cruelty of it was absolute. It wasn't just a financial scam. It was a desecration. They had watched Eleanor wither away, watched her heart stop beating from the grief of losing her only child, all while David was sitting in a warehouse an hour away, probably playing video games and drinking beer. They let her die for money. I swept the pile of gravel onto the concrete floor. The sound was a harsh scatter, like hail. I didn't cry. I was past tears. The grief that had defined my life for the last 4 years evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, white-hot clarity. It was the feeling of a circuit finally closing, the arc flash before the explosion. I picked up the screwdriver. I gripped it until my knuckles turned white. I walked back into the house, leaving the urn open and empty on the bench. I washed my hands in the kitchen sink, scrubbing the gray dust from my skin until it was raw and red. I grabbed my coat. I grabbed my keys. I walked out to the truck where Frank was waiting. "Well?" Frank asked, looking at my face. "Kitty litter," I said. The words were flat, devoid of inflection. "And gravel." Frank let out a long, slow breath. He reached into his glove box and pulled out his old service piece, a snub nose. He checked the cylinder, spun it, and snapped it shut. "Gary, Indiana," Frank said. "Drive," I said, "and don't stop for anything." The drive to Gary, Indiana, was a descent into a mechanical graveyard. We passed the skeletal remains of steel mills, their smokestacks rising like broken fingers against the bruised night sky. The air here tasted of sulfur and rust, a sharp contrast to the damp cold of Chicago. Frank navigated the industrial park with his headlights off, the sedan rolling silently over cracked asphalt. We were in a maze of corrugated metal and chain-link fences, a place where businesses went to die. "That's the one," Frank whispered, pointing to a low-slung building at the end of a cul-de-sac. It was a bleak structure, sheet metal peeling away from the frame like dead skin. GPS puts Brian's phone right inside. We parked in the shadow of a rusted shipping container. 300 yards out, Frank killed the engine. The silence that followed was heavy, amplified by the drumming of my own heart. I raised the binoculars. My hands were steady now, a forced mechanical calm I used when working with live wires. I focused the lens. A single sodium security light buzzed above a steel side door. It was the only illumination in a sea of black. "He's early," Frank murmured. A pair of headlights swept across the warehouse wall. Brian's car. It was a sleek, silver sedan that looked alien in this wasteland. It rolled to a stop near the door. Brian stepped out. He was dressed in a tailored wool coat, looking every inch the successful friend. He popped the trunk and pulled out 2 grocery bags. The casualness of it made my stomach turn. He wasn't visiting a prisoner. He was feeding a pet. He walked to the steel door. He didn't use a key. He knocked a rhythmic, coded sequence. Rap, rap, rap. Pause. Rap. I held my breath. The condensation on the binocular lenses blurred the image, and I wiped them frantically with my sleeve. The door groaned open. A figure stepped into the pool of yellow light. Time stopped. The physics of the world suspended. It was a man. He had a thick, unkempt beard that hit his jawline. His hair was long and greasy, matted against his forehead. He wore dirty sweatpants and a stained t-shirt that hung loosely on a frame that used to be athletic. David, my son, he looked like a ghost, who hadn't eaten in weeks. He looked broken. God, I whispered. The words scraped my throat. Seeing him alive didn't bring relief. It brought a wave of nausea. He was breathing. He was standing there. And he was rotting. Frank was already moving. He had rolled down his window an inch and was aiming a parabolic microphone, a clear plastic dish with a pistol grip, at the doorway. He plugged in a headset and handed me the spare earpiece. Put it in, Frank said. Don't make a sound. I jammed the plastic bud into my ear. The world narrowed down to a hiss of static, the distant wail of a train, and then voices. They sounded tinny, stripped of bass, but terrifyingly intimate. It was like standing right next to them. You're late, David's voice said. It was rough, unused, the voice of a man who spent his days in silence. Traffic was a bitch on the skyway, Brian said smoothly. The sound of a paper bag rustling was deafening in my ear. Got your supplies. Whiskey, smokes. And Sarah sent some of that pasta you like. Did she? David asked. There was a desperate hunger in his tone. Did she write a note? Too risky, buddy, Brian said. You know the protocol? No paper trail. If the feds find a note, they find you. I'm going crazy in here, Bree, David said. He leaned against the doorframe, his posture defeated. It's been 4 years. The walls are closing in. I know, Brian's voice was soothing. Practiced. It was the voice he used when he sold insurance. But we're close. The statute of limitations on the fraud. We just need a little more time. How's Dad? David asked. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought the microphone would pick it up. He's holding up, Brian lied. He's old, Dave. He's slowing down, but he pays the monthly vig. He thinks he's keeping the sharks away from Leo. I hate that, David whispered. I hate taking his money. He's on a fixed income. It's temporary, Brian said sharply. Once we get you to Mexico, we pay him back. With interest. Remember the plan. Mexico, David repeated. 2 more months, you said. 2 months. I'm finalizing the passports. Then you, Sarah, and Leo, you're gone, sipping margaritas on the beach. And the investigation? David asked. The private investigators the insurance company hired? Still sniffing around, Brian said. That's why you can't leave this building, Dave. 1 photo, 1 slip-up, and it's over. You go to prison for 20 years. Sarah goes to prison as an accomplice. Leo goes to foster care. David flinched. The threat was a precision strike. Brian knew exactly where the wires were exposed. I won't let that happen, David said, his voice trembling. Then take the whiskey. Go inside. Stay low. Brian patted David on the shoulder. It was a gesture of dominance, not comfort. I'll see you Tuesday. Brian turned and walked back to his car. David stood in the doorway, clutching the grocery bags, watching him go. He looked small, a child left behind at school. The steel door clanged shut. The lock engaged with a heavy thunk. I ripped the earpiece out. He's killing him, I snarled. I reached for the door handle. He's keeping him in a cage with ghost stories. Wait, Frank's hand shot out, grabbing my wrist. His grip was iron. Let go, Frank. That's my son. Look at the dynamic, Arthur, Frank hissed. David isn't running the show. He's the victim. He's accomplice. No, listen to what we just heard. Frank pointed at the warehouse. David thinks there are investigators. He thinks there are sharks. He thinks he's protecting you and Leo by staying dead. I slumped back in the seat, the adrenaline curdling into bile. He doesn't know about the Cayman Islands, I realized. He doesn't know they're stealing the money. He's the mark. Frank said. They have him working remote jobs in there, earning cash that they steal, while he waits for a Mexico escape that doesn't exist. They're going to leave him there, I said. The horror of it was absolute. When they fly out on Monday, they're just going to leave him in that box. Exactly, Frank said. He's waiting for a rescue that's never coming. I stared at the rusted metal of the warehouse. My anger shifted. It wasn't directed at David anymore. It was directed at the intricate, cruel machinery that had been built around him. He's a fool, I said softly. But he's my fool. We can't just bust in there, Frank said, stowing the microphone. If we kick down the door, he might panic. He thinks we're the sharks, or the feds. He might do something stupid. So what do? We need leverage, Frank said. We need to show him the truth. We need to break the spell before we break the door. The emails, I said, remembering Marcus and the data files. We need to know exactly when they're leaving. We need the smoking gun. Let's get back to the city, Frank said, starting the car. We have work to do. I took one last look at the warehouse. A single vent on the roof was puffing white steam into the cold air. It looked like the breath of a buried man. Hang on, David, I whispered. I'm coming for you. Frank's basement was a bunker against the world. The only light came from the bank of monitors, casting long blue shadows across the concrete floor. The hum of the computer fans sounded like a swarm of angry bees. It was 2 hours in a.m. My eyes felt like they were full of sand. Got it, Frank grunted. He leaned back in his chair, cracking his knuckles. Password was Leo 2018. Predictable. Open it, I said, leaning over his shoulder. Frank clicked the mouse. A window popped up. It was a private email thread between Sarah and Brian. The subject line made my blood run cold. The escape. Read it, Frank said softly. I squinted at the screen. The text was glowing white against a black background, stark and undeniable. From Sarah to Brian date. Yesterday, 10:14 a.m. Did the transfer clear? From Brian to Sarah date. Yesterday, 10:16 a.m. Yes. All of it. The Phoenix account is empty. $100,000 is sitting in the Caymans. We are clear. I felt a phantom pain in my chest. $100,000. That was David's hard work. That was my pension. That was Leo's future. All of it sitting on an island I would never see. Keep reading, Frank pointed lower down the chain. From Sarah to Brian date. Yesterday, 10:20 a.m. Does David suspect? From Brian to Sarah date. Yesterday, 10:22 a.m. Oh. The idiot thinks he's going to Mexico. He thinks we're buying a villa. I gave him a bottle of whiskey to keep him quiet. From Sarah to Brian date. Yesterday, 10:25 a.m. Good. We leave him behind. Let him rot in that warehouse. By the time he figures it out, we'll be gone. Rot, I whispered. The word tasted like poison. They weren't just leaving him. They were burying him alive. Here's the kicker, Frank said, his voice devoid of emotion. He scrolled to the bottom of the thread. From Brian to Sarah. Death, think. Yesterday, 10:30 a.m. What about the kid? My breath hitched. I gripped the back of Frank's chair so hard the leather creaked. From Sarah to Brian. Date, yesterday, 10:32 a.m. Leo stays with his grandpa. We travel light, no baggage. The room spun. Baggage. She called her own son baggage. I stumbled back, hitting the wall. I slid down until I hit the cold concrete floor. I put my head in my hands. She's a monster, I said. My voice broke. I knew she was greedy. I didn't know she was this. She's worse than a monster, Frank said, turning to face me. She's a sociopath. She doesn't feel anything, Arthur. Not for David. Not for you. Not even for Leo. I stared at the floor. I thought about Leo, sitting in that diner, dipping his fries in ketchup, wondering why his mommy was always whispering on the phone. She was planning to abandon him. She was going to fly away to a tropical island with her lover and leave her 6-year-old son with a grandfather who was running on fumes. When? I asked. When do they leave? Frank checked the attachment on the last email. Monday morning, 8:00 a.m. Flight. O'Hare to Nassau. That gives us 3 days, I said, standing up. My knees popped, but the pain was distant. We call the cops. We show them this. We can't, Frank said. Why not? It's right there. It's an email, Arthur. A digital copy. In court, a good lawyer and with 100 grand. They'll hire a great one. We'll argue it's faked. They'll say hacked accounts. Planted evidence. But the money is offshore, Frank cut in. Beyond reach. If we call the cops now, they might arrest David for faking his death.
That's a felony, Sarah and Brian.
They might get slapped with fraud, but they have the cash to fight it. They might even walk. So we just let them go? No, Frank said. He stood up and walked over to his gun safe. He pulled out a heavy folder. We don't need the police yet. We need a witness. A witness who can testify to the conspiracy from the inside. David, I said. David is the key, Frank agreed. But right now, he's brainwashed. He thinks he's the criminal. He thinks Sarah is saving him. We have to flip him, I said. The realization settled on me like a heavy coat. We have to show him who she really is. He might not believe you, Frank warned. He's been living in a box for 4 years, listening to their lies. His reality is warped. He'll believe me, I said. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the printed photo of Sarah and Brian at the coffee shop, the one where they were laughing, the one where they looked like they had won. I'm going to break his heart, I said, looking at the photo. I have to destroy his world to save his life. It's going to be ugly, Frank said. I know, I said. I walked to the stairs. Grab the printer, Frank. Print everything. The emails, the bank transfers, the flight itinerary. Where are we going? Back to Gary, I said. I'm going to wake the dead. We didn't knock this time. There was no secret code, no rhythm of knuckles on steel to announce a friend. Frank parked the car right up against the loading dock, killing the lights. The warehouse loomed over us, a black monolith against a starless sky. The wind howled through gaps in the corrugated siding, making the whole building moan like a dying animal. I grabbed the heavy manila folder from the dashboard. It felt like I was carrying a loaded weapon. Inside were the printouts, the emails, the bank transfers, the photos, the ballistics of betrayal. You ready? Frank asked, checking the slide on his pistol. He didn't draw it, just kept it loose in his holster. He might panic. A cornered animal bites. He's not an animal, I said, though the image of him in the doorway earlier suggested otherwise. He's my son. We walked to the side door. Frank produced a tension wrench and a pick from his pocket. He worked in silence, his breath misting in the freezing air. It took him 10 seconds. The lock gave a soft click. I took a deep breath. The air tasted of ozone and rot. I kicked the door open. It banged against the interior wall with a sound like a gunshot. David, I roared. It's over. The inside of the warehouse was a cavern of shadows. A single work light clamped to a rafter cast a harsh, triangular glare on the concrete floor. Movement in the corner. Violent, jerky movement. David scrambled up from a filthy mattress. He was clutching a rusted tire iron. His eyes were wide, white rims of terror in a face smeared with grime. Stay back, he screamed. His voice cracked, high and hysterical. I have money. I can get you money. He thought we were the sharks. He thought we were the cartel hitmen. Sarah had invented to keep him in this cage. I stepped into the light. Put it down, David. He froze. He squinted against the glare, his chest heaving. The tire iron wavered in his grip. Dad? The word was a whisper, filled with confusion. Then panic surged back. Dad, get out. They're watching. If they see you, they'll kill us both. There is no they, David. I walked toward him. My boots echoed on the concrete. There are no sharks. There are no hitmen. There is no debt. You don't know. He backed away, tripping over empty whiskey bottles. They clattered across the floor. Sarah said. She said the cartel. Sarah lies, I said, stopping 10 feet from him. The smell hit me then, stale sweat, cheap alcohol, and the musk of a man who hadn't seen the sun in years. It broke my heart, but I forced my face to remain hard. I had to be the grounding wire. I had to take the surge. She's protecting me, David yelled, tears cutting tracks through the dirt on his face. I did this for you, for Leo. I had to disappear to save you. You didn't save us, I said, my voice low and steady. You destroyed us. I threw the folder onto the makeshift table beside his cot. It slid across the plywood, stopping next to a half-eaten can of beans. Look at it. What is it? He was shaking now, the tire iron ironing to his side. The truth, Frank said from the shadows near the door. His voice was calm, authoritative. Read the emails, David. David looked at me, then at the folder. He dropped the iron. It rang against the concrete. He wiped his hands on his pants and opened the file. The first thing he saw was the photo. Sarah and Brian. The coffee shop, the laughter, the intimacy. David stared at it. He blinked, as if trying to clear a smudge from his vision. Brian? He whispered. But he's my best friend. He brings me food. He's sleeping with your wife, I said brutally. He has been for months, maybe longer. No, David shook his head. No, he's helping us. He's the go-between. Turn the page, I commanded. He flipped to the bank records. The Cayman Islands account. The deposits from Phoenix Consulting. The withdrawals. You've been coding in here, haven't you? I asked. Making money for the debt? Yeah, David said, his eyes scanning the numbers. About $4,000 a month. Send it to the account Brian set up. And they steal it, I pointed out. Look at the balance, David. 0. They move it offshore the second it hits. But the debt, I visited Eli Vance yesterday, Frank cut in. The man you supposedly owed $60,000 to. It says you paid him off 5 years ago. You were clean, David. David looked up. His face was pale, the blood draining away. The foundation of his reality was cracking. I saved Nito Daddy. I sold the truck. I thought Sarah said there was interest. Penalties. She made it up, I said. All of it, Dada. To keep you here, to keep you working, to keep the pension checks coming. My pension, I added, the anger finally bleeding into my voice. $1,200 a month. For 4 years, I lived on ramen noodles, David. I skipped heart medication, so she could buy designer coats and fly first class. He looked like he was going to vomit. He swayed, gripping the table. No, Sarah wouldn't. She loves me. Read the last email, I said, the one from yesterday. He turned the page. His eyes scanned the text. Subject, the escape. I watched him read the words. I saw the exact moment his soul shattered. What about the kid? Leo stays with his grandpa. We travel light. No baggage. David made a sound I will never forget. It wasn't a scream. It was a low, guttural noise, like an animal caught in a trap chewing off its own leg. He crumpled. He fell to his knees on the dirty concrete, clutching the paper. Baggage. He choked out. Snot and tears ran down into his beard. She called him baggage. They leave Monday, I said, stepping closer. I put my hand on his shoulder. It felt thin, frail. They're going to the Bahamas. With your money. With my money. And they're leaving you here to rot. He looked up at me. The terror was gone. The confusion was gone. In their place was something darker, something ancient. I'll kill them, he whispered. He stood up. The frailty vanished. He grabbed the tire iron again. His knuckles were white. I'm going to kill them both. He started for the door. David, stop. I grabbed his arm. He was stronger than he looked, fueled by a rage that burned hot and fast. He dragged me a step before Frank stepped in front of him, blocking the exit. Get out of my way, David snarled. They're leaving my son. If you walk out that door with that iron, Frank said calmly, you go to prison for life. Or you get shot by the police, and Leo grows up an orphan. David stopped. He was trembling, vibrating with the need for violence. They stole my life, he hissed. They stole 4 years. They stole my wife. They stole my son. So steal it back, I said. David turned to me. How? By killing them? No, I said. By being the one thing they don't think you are. What's that? Alive, I said. We don't need a murderer, David. We need a witness. I faked my death, David stammered, the adrenaline faltering. I'll go to jail. Yes, I said. You will. You committed fraud. You abandoned your child, even if you thought it was to save him. You have to pay for that. I gripped his shoulders, forcing him to look me in the eye. You have to be a man, David. For the first time in 4 years. You go to the FBI. You confess. You hand them this folder. And you watch Sarah and Brian go away for a very, very long time. He looked at the tire iron in his hand. Then he looked at the photo of Sarah, laughing. He dropped the iron. It clattered to the floor with a sound of finality. I'll do it, he said. His voice was hollow, but steady. I'll go to prison. I don't care. As long as they don't get Leo, they won't touch him. I promise. But we have to move fast. They fly out in 48 hours. Get me out of here, David said, looking around the warehouse as if seeing it for the first time. Please, Dad, just get me out of here. I put my arm around him. He leaned his weight on me, heavy and smelling of despair. Let's go home, son, I said. O'Hare International Airport was a cathedral of transient noise. The air smelled of burnt coffee, floor wax, and the low-grade anxiety of 10,000 people rushing to be somewhere else. I stood behind a concrete pillar near the American Airlines check-in counters at Terminal 3. My hands were in my pockets, gripping a roll of antacids. My stomach was a knot of acid and adrenaline. Relax, Arthur, Frank murmured. He was leaning against a kiosk, pretending to read a brochure about TSA pre-check. You're vibrating. I just want it done, I said. My eyes scanned the sliding glass doors, watching the rotation of travelers entering from the cold Chicago morning. Next to us stood Agent Miller. He was young for the FBI, maybe 30, with a jawline you could cut glass on and eyes that didn't blink enough. He was chewing gum with a slow, rhythmic cadence. He looked bored, but I knew better. I saw the wire running up his neck, vanishing into his ear. And behind us, flanked by 2 plainclothes agents, was a man in a cheap suit that hung too loose on his frame. David, we had cleaned him up, shaved the beard, cut the hair, but we couldn't scrub the 4 years of darkness out of his eyes. He looked like a man walking to the gallows, not a rescue. He hadn't spoken since we entered the terminal. He just stared at the floors, hands trembling slightly at his sides. They're 800 hours, Miller said into his lapel mic. Eyes up, the automatic doors slid open. A gust of wind blew in, carrying the scent of exhaust, and there they were. Sarah walked in first. She looked magnificent, and I hated her for it. She wore a camel hair coat, oversized sunglasses, and a silk scarf. She walked with the entitlement of a woman who had already won. She was pulling a brand-new Louis Vuitton rolling bag luggage bought with my pension checks. Brian was right behind her, laughing at something she said. He wore a leather jacket and jeans, looking like an off-duty actor. He had his hand on the small of her back, a possessive, intimate touch. They looked like a power couple heading for a second honeymoon. They didn't look like people who had left a man in a cage and a child without a future. Target acquired, Miller whispered. Wait for the counter. We watched them approach the first-class line. There was no queue. They stepped up to the agent, smiling. Brian handed over 2 passports. Sarah lifted her heavy bag onto the scale. I watched Sarah laugh again. It was the same laugh from the coffee shop photo. Light, carefree, the laugh of a sociopath. Now, Miller said. The dynamic of the terminal shifted instantly. The ambient noise seemed to drop away. Miller and 4 other agents materialized from the crowd, moving in a tight, predatory formation. They cut off the escape routes to the exit and the security checkpoint. Sarah Miller? Brian Cole? Miller S., flashing his badge. It was a fluid motion, practiced 1,000 times. Sarah looked annoyed, peering over her sunglasses. Yes? We're in a hurry. Our flight boards in 40 minutes. You're not making that flight, Miller said, his voice flat. You're under arrest. The silence that followed was absolute. The check-in agent stopped typing. A nearby family froze. Excuse me? Sarah laughed. A sharp, incredulous sound. Is this a joke? Who are you? FBI, Miller said. Charges are conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, and grand larceny. That's ridiculous. Brian stepped forward, puffing out his chest. We're business consultants. You have the wrong people. Do we? I stepped out from behind the pillar. Sarah saw me first. Her face went slack. The blood drained out of her cheeks so fast. She looked like she might faint. "Arthur?" she whispered. "You look nice, Sarah," I said. My voice was calm, terrifyingly so. "Going somewhere?" "Arthur, tell them." She reached out, her hands shaking. "Tell them this is a mistake." "You know me." "I thought I did," I said. "I thought you were a grieving widow. I didn't know you were a thief." "You're senile," Brian shouted, panic rising in his voice. "He's a crazy old man. We haven't done anything." "We have the emails, Brian," Frank said, stepping up beside me. "We have the bank transfers. We have the Phoenix consulting logs." "And we have the witness," I said. I turned slightly. The two agents behind me stepped aside. David walked forward. The sound Sarah made wasn't human. It was a strangled, high-pitched keen, like a kettle boiling over. She dropped her purse. Her hands flew to her mouth. Brian stumbled back, tripping over his own luggage. He looked like he was seeing a corpse. "Mike?" Sarah gasped. She used his alias. Even now, she couldn't say his real name. "Hello, Sarah," David said. His voice was rough, scraping like gravel. You're supposed to be," Brian stammered. "In Indiana?" David finished. "Rotting? Waiting for a signal? He's dead!" Sarah screamed at the agents, pointing a trembling finger at David. "That man is dead."
"I have the certificate!"
"This is a trick. It's not a trick. It's not a trick," Agent Miller said. "It's the resurrection." "You played me," David said, stepping closer to her. He looked down at the woman he had destroyed his life for. "I ate beans from a can and slept on a dirty mattress for 4 years. I thought I was saving us. David." "Please," Sarah whimpered, tears finally spilling over. They weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of a trapped animal. "I did it for us. I was going to send for you." "Liar," I said. "We saw the email. No baggage. That's what you called Leo." Sarah flinched as if I'd slapped her. "Baggage," David repeated. My son, Brian, bolted. It was a pathetic attempt. He shoved the businessman aside and tried to sprint toward the exit doors. He made it 3 steps. 2 agents tackled him. He hit the polished terrazzo floor with a sickening thud. "My arm," Brian screamed as they wrenched his hands behind his back. The handcuffs clicked. A sharp mechanical bite. Sarah didn't run. She couldn't move. She stared at David, her eyes wide and glassy. "I love you," she whispered, desperate. David looked at her. For a second, I saw the old love there, the ghost of the life they had before the lies. Then I saw the warehouse. I saw the urn full of kitty litter. "You love money," David said softly. "You never loved me." "Cuff her," Miller ordered. An agent spun Sarah around. She didn't fight. She went limp, sobbing loudly now. A theatrical performance for an audience that wasn't buying tickets anymore. "Where's the money?" Miller asked Brian, who was being hauled to his feet. Brian was bleeding from his nose. He looked at Sarah, then at the agents. "She made me do it. It was her idea." "The Cayman account," Frank said, holding up the file. "It's all here, every penny." "You're going away for a long time," Miller said to Brian. "Federal prison isn't the Bahamas." As they dragged Sarah past me, she stopped. She looked at me with pure, distilled hatred. The mask was gone. The grieving mother was gone. There was only the shark. "I hope you die alone, Arthur," she hissed. "I hope you rot in that house with your memories." "I won't be alone," I said, meeting her gaze. "I have Leo, and he'll never know your name." She screamed something else. But the agents pushed her through the doors, out into the waiting squad cars. The terminal quieted down. The show was over. Travelers went back to their phones. The machine churned on. I turned to David. Agent Miller was standing in front of him. He held up a pair of handcuffs. "David Miller," the agent said. "I have to take you in. Conspiracy to commit fraud. Faking a death." David didn't flinch. He didn't look for an exit. He held out his wrists. "I know," David said. The metal clicked shut. I stepped forward and put my hands on his shoulders. He felt solid now. Real. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said. His eyes were wet. "For Mom. For the money. For everything." "You were lost, David," I said. "Now you're found. Tell Leo." He choked on the name. Tell him I went away to work. Don't tell him I was. Don't tell him I was a coward. I'll tell him his father made a mistake, I said, and that he's paying for it like a man. Can I see him? David asked. When I get out? That depends on you, I said sternly. You do the time. You fix yourself. You earn it. I will, he promised. Miller nodded to me. We'll take care of him, Arthur. The cooperation will help with the sentencing. He won't get life. Thank you, I said. They led my son away. He didn't walk with the limp anymore. He walked upright, his head high, carrying the weight of his actions, instead of the weight of a lie. I stood there with Frank, as the flashing lights faded outside. It's done, Frank said. The circuit is closed. Not yet, I said. I looked at the departure board, flights to everywhere. Now I have to go home and tell the little boy that his mother isn't coming back. That's the hardest part, Frank said. No, I said, buttoning my coat against the chill. The hardest part was living with the ghost. This is just the truth, and the truth I can handle. We walked out of the terminal, into the biting wind of a Chicago morning. The sun was breaking through the gray clouds, weak and pale, but it was there. The wheels of justice grind slow, they say, but when they finally catch a gear, they grind exceedingly fine. 3 months later, the courtroom smelled of lemon polish and stale anxiety. I sat in the back row, my hands folded on my lap, watching the end of the show. The trial had been swift. The evidence Frank and I gathered, the emails, the bank transfers, the flight logs, the testimony of the doctor who signed the fake death certificate, was insurmountable. It was a landslide of facts that buried Sarah's lies. Sarah Miller, the judge read looking down over his spectacles, for the charges of aggravated wire fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering. Sarah stood at the defense table. She wasn't wearing her expensive trench coat or the grieving widow's sweats. She wore a standard orange jumpsuit. Her roots were showing, a dark stripe against the blonde. She looked small. I sentence you to 15 years in federal prison. Sarah didn't scream this time. She didn't fight. She slumped forward, putting her head on the table, and wept. It wasn't the soft, sympathetic crying she had used on me for 4 years. It was the ugly, heaving sob of a narcissist who realizes the mirror has finally shattered. She wasn't crying for David. She wasn't crying for Leo. She was crying for herself. I felt nothing. No pity. No anger. Just a quiet, hollow sense of fulfillment. Brian Cole was next. He got 10 years. He had tried to turn state's evidence against Sarah, squealing like a trapped rat the moment the handcuffs went on. But the prosecutor didn't need his help. The emails spoke for themselves. Loyalty among thieves is a myth. They turn on each other the second the money runs out. And then, David, he stood tall. He had shaved the beard completely. He looked like the boy I remembered from high school. Before the oil rigs, before the debt, before the fear. 6 years, the judge said, for insurance fraud and falsifying legal documents. It was a mercy. It could have been 20, but David's cooperation, and the fact that he was effectively a prisoner of his own wife's manipulation, had weighed in his favor. I accept the sentence, Your Honor, David said clearly. Hiena looked at me in the gallery. He didn't smile. He nodded. It was a silent acknowledgement. I broke it. I'll fix it. The money came back in a check from the Department of Justice's Asset Forfeiture Division. $60,000, plus interest, plus damages seized from Brian's personal accounts. It was a staggering amount of money, a piece of paper that represented 4 years of my life. I didn't buy a new truck. I didn't go on a vacation. I hired a crew to fix the roof of the bungalow. I replaced the furnace that had been rattling since Eleanor died. I fixed the foundation where the water had been seeping in. I rebuilt the house. The rest went into a trust fund, the Leo Miller Education Fund, locked tight, compound interest. By the time that boy was 18, he wouldn't have to work an oil rig to pay for his mistakes. He would have choices. I was in the garage one afternoon, organizing my tools, when the urge took me. I looked at the workbench. The brass urn was still there. I had emptied the kitty litter and gravel into the trash weeks ago, but the vessel remained. I picked it up. It was just metal now, a hollow object. I took it out to the recycling bin at the curb. I dropped it in, It made a loud dissonant clang against the plastic. I walked back inside and didn't look back. I visited David at the correctional facility in Terracout a month later. The visiting room was sterile, smelling of industrial cleaner. We spoke through a thick glass partition, using black telephone handsets. "You look good," I lied. He looked tired. The prison grays washed him out, and there were new lines around his eyes. But he looked sober. 3 meals a day, David said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. No rent, a library. "It's better than the warehouse, Dad. Are they treating you okay?" "I keep my head down," he said. "I work in the laundry. I think a lot. Thinking is good, as long as you don't dwell." He gripped the phone tighter. "How is he?" "Leo is good," I said. "He's in 1st grade now. He lost a tooth last week. The tooth fairy left him $5. David's eyes filled with tears. He blinked them away furiously. "Does he ask?" "Every day. What do you tell him?" David's voice cracked. "Does he know I'm a criminal?" "I tell him the truth," I said firmly. "I tell him his daddy made some bad choices. That he got lost for a while, but that he's working very hard to pay for those choices so he can come home the right way." David nodded, swallowing hard. "Can I see him? Please? Just for 5 minutes." "Not yet," I said. David looked hurt, but I held my ground. "You're his father, David. But you abandoned him. You let Sarah call him baggage. You have to own that." "I do," he whispered. "You serve your time," I said. "You get out. You get a job. You stay sober. You show up. Then you see him." "I will," David promised. "I'll earn it. I know you will." The buzzer sounded, signaling the end of visitation. "Dad?" David asked as I started to hang up. "Yeah? Thank you. For coming to the warehouse. For not leaving me there. I'm an electrician, David," I said, offering him a small, sad smile. "I fix broken connections." I walked out of the prison into the late afternoon sun. The air was crisp, smelling of cut grass and damp earth. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs. For the first time in 4 years, the weight was gone. The envelope in my pocket wasn't cash for a blackmailer. It was a drawing Leo had made of a dinosaur. I drove home. Leo was in the front yard, digging in the dirt with a plastic shovel. He looked up when I pulled into the driveway, his face smeared with mud, his smile gap-toothed and radiant. "Grandpa!" He ran to me. I scooped him up, swinging him around. He felt solid, real. He wasn't a pawn in a game anymore. He was just a boy. "Hey, Scout," I said, setting him down on the porch swing. "What are you digging for?" "Treasure," he said seriously. "Find any?" "Just rocks." "Rocks are okay," I said, sitting beside him. "Sometimes you have to dig through a lot of rocks to find the truth." We sat there as the sun began to set, painting the Chicago skyline in hues of orange and purple. The neighborhood was quiet. Mrs. Gable was watering her plants next door. She waved at me. I waved back. "Grandpa?" Leo asked, leaning his head against my arm. "Yeah, kiddo. Is Daddy coming back?" I looked at the photo on the mantel, through the window. Eleanor was gone. The urn was gone. The lies were gone. "Someday, Leo," I said softly. "Is he far away?" "He's where he needs to be right now," I said. "He's fixing himself, like Grandpa fixed the roof." "Okay," Leo said, accepting the logic of a 6-year-old. "I love you, Grandpa. I love you too." I looked up at the sky. The first star was appearing, a pinprick of light in the deepening blue. "We got them, El," I whispered to the empty air. "We got the truth." I had learned a hard lesson in the dark stairwells and cold warehouses of this city. Blood doesn't make you family. Shared DNA is just a biological accident. Family is loyalty. Family is showing up. Family is the people who don't leave you behind. And sometimes you have to dig up the dead to save the living. "Come on," I said, standing up and taking Nice's hand. "Let's go inside. I think it's a grilled cheese kind of night." "With pickles?" Leo asked. "With pickles," I agreed. We went inside, and I locked the door behind us. Not out of fear, but to keep the warmth in. I hope Arthur's journey struck a chord with you. It's a hard truth that sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who cast the longest shadows. But as we saw with Arthur, The truth is the only foundation strong enough to rebuild a life on it. If you felt the weight of this story and the power of family, please take a moment to like and subscribe. It helps us continue to share these hidden, powerful stories with you. Thank you for listening, and may you always find the warmth in your own home.